71, the important number for today. Penn State football played 71 players on Saturday. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. He is Sean Fitz. This is the BWI Live Recruiting Show. We're going to be talking about recruiting today, but Fitz, it was the Delaware list, so not necessarily a whiteout level of people coming to Happy Valley for recruiting. So we're going to be looking at Penn State freshman class today. See how they did in their debut. Fitz, how are you doing today on your Monday debut here on the show?
I'm doing great. Hopefully everyone else is doing great. I know Greg and Ryan are doing great. They're going out on the Phillies game today, so we don't have Ryan, but it's okay. Coming off that Delaware recruiting weekend, I think he needed to rest up because it was such an amazing list.
So taxing, so many people to call, so many conversations to have. But let's have that conversation about Penn State, Delaware. The kind of a high-level takeaway. We can get into the game and what you think about it in just a second, but what were your thoughts on Penn State's performance overall in a game where it kind of went according to script?
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, we kept waiting for something to happen. And I know the long run is something people are going to fixate on, but a couple of years ago they had Villanova in town, and Villanova gave them issues. Yeah. Delaware did not give them issues whatsoever. And Penn State, you came into it trying to find the catch, I think it was, and you came out of it thinking Penn State did what they wanted to do whenever they wanted to do it. And they didn't do it just by gashing them with big plays. And that was a lot by design on Delaware's behalf, playing those deep safeties. And that's kind of like, you can spin that, and that's kind of what you want to see out of Drew, like is making the right decisions, taking the underneath stuff, taking the stuff where you're going to bail out and get out of the pocket and find Dante Cephas for a nice chunk. Those things are what you're looking at from a decision-making standpoint, because those things are what's going to come and benefit you when you can't, just rely on going 80 yards with Nick Singleton, when Ohio State and Michigan are on the other side of the field. So really liked it from that aspect. The efficiency was there. Nothing is perfect in college football, but Penn State was pretty darn good on Saturday. And going back and watching it was kind of the same. Like, it was very cathartic to watch that, and just would they have two punts and then a drive that ended at the end of the game. Like, that's pretty great. And if you look across college football, not everybody's doing that. Ohio State, had a little tough time this weekend with Youngstown State. So, if you're setting the standard for those programs that you want to beat, Penn State's right where I think where it wants to be going into week 3.
You mentioned consistency and efficiency. Drew Aller with a 84, I think it was, % completion percentage, and that's pretty good. Yeah, there's probably a couple throwaways mixed in there as well. So if you look at his pure adjusted completion percentage, it might even be higher. I haven't had a chance to go and look in that because I was doing the film study of the defense first last week. But I did, to your point, digging into some of the film of I've never seen. So, from a coverage perspective, if you have a too high defense, the middle of the field is open. But if you drop 8 players on every single play, you can keep a safety in the middle of the field no matter what. And when Penn State's running 2 deep routes, they've got 12 personnel on the field. They're running basically 2 route patterns. There's not going to be a whole lot unless you have a terrible defense on the other side of the field. And Delaware, for their part, the difference in athleticism and talent is clear. But that's a good, well-coached defense, and it was a good, well-coached offense. So Delaware is not this is not Idaho from a couple of years ago. This was a good football team that was obviously overmatched from talent, but they did things that intentionally frustrated the Nittany Lions, and that's why they had drives of 13, 9, 9, and 9 for touchdowns the other day.
Yeah, and you hit it. They're well coached, so they're in the right spot. You're not necessarily going to win those physical battles, but they were in the right spot a lot of times. Yep. So that's a pretty good football team. Quarterback, I think, is going to be an issue for them in terms of accuracy. I mentioned it coming out of week 1 against Stony Brook. There were some balls that should have been picked off that were not. Penn State did get their hands on the football a couple of times, which is something you wanted to see from Penn State, something you expect to see from Penn State when they play an FCS opponent. So that's good to see. But Delaware, I think, gave them the looks that they wanted to get. And again, the processing from Drew, the pitch and catch, how many times did you look out and see, an open receiver? And there's been times in the past when those guys have been missed or missed in the sense that you're not going to be able to turn around and run. Drew seems to have a pretty good connection with Tyler Warren. We saw that from a pitch and catch aspect several times on Saturday. And I think that those things are kind of what's going to keep games going, what's going to keep drives going, which is going to, eventually end up in points against opponents that are not at a level that Delaware is at. So I think there's encouraging signs that can be gleaned from this. You're not going to look at it and say, well, it's great that Penn State overwhelmed, FCS opponent. That's what they're supposed to do. But there are like micro aggressions, I guess you could say, that you could look at Penn State's offense, especially, and say, hey, they're doing the things that we thought that they were capable of doing.
Yeah. One last thing I'll say about this is that this is also a good warm up for one of the teams that they're going to see on the schedule, because guess who plays 3 safeties? Ohio State's defense, coming from the Big 12. West Virginia, similar in terms of kind of coverage shells and amoeba defenses. And then you've got just the straight up, here's a 3 safety defense to practice against. So Penn State, different animal when you're talking about what Ohio State does it with and their aggressiveness with the front, but a good opportunity to see guys, for guys to see, a similar situation to what they're going to see later in the year. And it's a great warm-up the first 2 weeks to get through these with such ease from the quarterback position. Steven says, thanks for all the coverage, guys. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting the channel. Had a ton of people come up this weekend at the Tailgate Show talking about watching the show all the time. And I just want to say thank you so much for supporting what we do here on the BWI YouTube channel. Ryan back as well, excited for the Illinois business trip. Got a good Big Ten test for defensive tackles. Gap soundness must improve from the linebackers. If you can give me something quick on that, and then we got to get to something before we move on. Your thoughts on the defense and obviously the concern coming out of this game from Penn State fans.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of fingers going to be pointed straight at Tyler Elston, basically, and I think that's where people have gone to, which he's got to be better. That middle linebacker spot needs to figure out where it's at from a depth perspective, where it's at from a reps perspective. It's good that you get the younger guys in there, but that's 2 weeks in a row where you're kind of pointing the finger and you're kind of like, yeah, I see it. And even though that big run, was on Elston, I think you could talk about the interior guys as well. KJ Winston overran it, which was, I think, the guy that eventually would have taken over the gap that Elston did not fill. So I think there's a little bit to be spread around, but gap soundness, that's the theme of really the off season, with the defensive tackles. It's all going to be focused on the defensive tackles, but it's everybody. It's, it's finding that second level. And I think that's where Penn State, if you do have concerns coming out of this game, which I think they're probably a little bit overblown until they get to Michigan, that's where it's not a problem until it's a problem. And then when it's a problem, it's too late. So I think that's where I'm standing with that group, but I think that Mike needs to be better. I don't think we saw a ton of Kobe King this weekend. I don't even think he showed up on the stat sheet this weekend. But yeah, you want to be able to be serviceable in that area.
Yeah.
2 deep, 3 deep. Keon Wiley got in there a little bit. Tamir Robinson got in at the end as well. But, you want to see more out of that spot.
We're talking about we're actually not going to be talking a whole lot about the business trip, as Ryan said in the comments, going to Illinois this week, because we're focused on Delaware and the players that played this week before we move on to that game. But after that, it is the biggest game in college football, and I know that it's Iowa. I know that it's in September. I know that Ohio State and Michigan are on the schedule, but it's the whiteout, guys. Join the most exciting atmosphere in college football, and to do that, you need to have tickets. Tixmanjim.com is your place for it, and I've updated so that if you're watching here on the YouTube channel, you can actually see his phone number. It only took me, 4 or 5 weeks, but it's the 302-521-8380. That is the number you want to call. If you've been looking for a reliable source of Penn State football tickets, Jim at tixmanjim.com, formerly at psutixman.com, has been running his ticket exchange in Wilmington, Delaware, for over 25 years. Every buyer is handled with courtesy and respect. Every ticket purchased is guaranteed, and most every ticket is going to be transferred to your Ticketmaster email address. Proceeds are used to fund the PSU AA Chapter Scholarship Fund and the PSU Levi Lamb Fund for athletic scholarships. Get your whiteout tickets now. Homecoming is coming up as well. Michigan, Ohio State is on the road, but Michigan is at home. Go to tixmanjim.com, or you can contact Jim directly at his email, tixmanjim @gmail.com. And once again, the number is 302-521-8380. And we want to see you, yes, you, at the Penn State football game. So a little bit more about some of the things that you saw from the Penn State offense and defense, getting into a little bit more specifics with the offense and that methodical drive that they had going on during the game. When the backups got in, did you see the same level of consistency? And going into some of those young guys that we said we were going to highlight here on the show, what were your thoughts of, from an offensive perspective, the guys that got into the game? You're on mute.
I am on mute. Thank you. You're never going to see the same level of consistency, but you're going to see some things that you like to build on. And on the offensive side, it's probably a little bit more difficult on the offensive side because the defense, you can just turn them loose. We saw a couple guys from the defensive side that popped like on first viewing. So that's always a good sign. And then when you go back in the second time, it's also, what you thought you saw on Saturday. So that's good.
Yeah.
You focus kind of on the offensive side. Anthony Donka and Javen Williams got in there, got some extended reps. Chimney Ono got in, I think, the last drive of the game on the offense, but those two guys got in there for some extended reps. It's about what you'd expect based on the preseason chatter. You hit some, you miss some, which you're a freshman offensive lineman. And I don't care if you're going up against an FCS opponent, you're a freshman offensive lineman, you're going to miss some blocks. But they looked like they belong physically. They were not thrown around. I thought Javen Williams, for a guy that we've talked about his pass sets being very much a work in progress based on his background and wing T running offense, playing guard.
Yeah.
Thought he looked okay. Thought he held up okay there. They had some nice blocks on the big Trey Potts run, where both of them kind of opened the hole, like two freshmen opening a hole for a running back. That was a pretty good job by those guys. So
yep.
I think those are the two that you look at and you feel pretty decent about where they stand. You understand the perspective of where they are. They are true freshmen. You're not asking them to go in there and move people around. You're not asking them to go in there and be even what Drew Shelton was last year because of the guys that you have ahead of them. But I thought they did a pretty good job. And I think for a first showing, that's pretty good. Mentioned Chimney Ono got in there. He held up okay, even though I think he just played with half his body. his feet did not move much, but I thought he did okay. I think the biggest surprise with that is Ono got in, Alex Birchmeyer did not. Which go back 6 months, go back 8 months. That's a big surprise right there. So, but those offensive linemen, the guys that got in there, I thought held up pretty well. Very, very much looked like freshmen, but at the same time did enough nice things where you're coming out of it thinking, okay, they've got something to build on right there.
Yeah, and the reason I wanted to ask you about the offense first is because I haven't had a chance to watch those guys yet. I was curious to get your opinion on them and kind of set what my eyes should be looking for when I look at it later. But clearly, the guys that showed up for Penn State on the stat sheet and when you watched it was the Penn State defensive freshman making some big plays. King Mack, Tony Rojas. Even Elliot Washington got on the screen, even though it probably was for a pass interference call, which I thought was a little bit not.
A bit much, yeah.
That was not a pass interference call. He's just faster than the other guy. What were your impressions of the freshman group on defense and their performance late in the game?
So I know I'm going to forget about it, so I'll bring it up now. Elliot Washington, very, very fast. There was one play that where the ball was going away from the guy kind of squirted loose. And then you just saw some acceleration out of nowhere for Elliot Washington. Like, that dude can fly, flat out fly. I don't know that he's got it down yet from a corner standpoint, because I think Zion Tracy is ahead of him right now from the actual position standpoint. But man, that guy can fly, and it's a different level of speed that you're used to seeing, especially that late in the game against an FCS opponent. So that's good. But got to go with King Mack here, man. We said it after the game. He was pretty fantastic. Like, this is a guy that you look at that number 9. Of course, it's a different build of a number 9 than you're used to from Penn State for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
But he was active. He does not mind hitting. I know he's not a big guy, but he does not mind filling that space and closing fast. Was really impressed with King Mack. He had a nice third down coverage stop. The ball wasn't there, but he was. So that's certainly how you would grade that. So King Mack, I got to say that was inspiring. He's going to be a guy that's a green light, or he already is a green light, but he's going to play, I think, every week, especially on special teams. It's going to be tough to crack that safety depth chart, but that kid's got some talent, man. So for a guy from coming this far from Florida, get him engaged, get him involved, do everything that you can do to, I guess, keep him happy where he's at. And you've got something there for the future.
Yeah, one of the just to kind of underline that, you would think 5'9". What is he, like 185 right now?
I think he's listed at 5'10", 190.
Yeah.
But if he's 5'10", I mean, he got somebody to put some lifts in or something like that. 5'10", 188 is where he's at on the official roster. He's just I think a smidge shorter than 5'10", but we'll give him 5'10". He looked like 5'10".
Yeah. 5'10", 188, and you'd expect a guy like that. We talked about him as a slot player as well on third down. That's where he was playing on the third down defense during the game. And yet, when he's out there with the regular defense and the second string has come in, he's playing boundary safety. He's the guy filling in the box at 5'10". I'm so impressed by his physicality and his ability to lay the wood. He is a guy that hits, and as you mentioned, like just the ability to fill in the run game, all of those things. There's not a whole lot he can't do from a talent perspective, and it's just honing in on what do you want him to do. And when you have that versatility and you have two guys like him and Elliott Washington, this is what I was marveling at as I'm looking at these guys and I'm like, I know that Penn State has some top line corners and they have a really good secondary, but these guys might move better. Like, they just move different. Him and Washington, their explosiveness of the football was really fun to watch late in the game.
Yeah, and sometimes for those freshmen, they don't know what they don't know, and it's the most pure form of what they can offer. Mac was that way. Jameel Lyons was that way. I thought Jameel Lyons looked very explosive on Saturday. Of course, limited in terms of what we saw, but like he was all over the place. And when you hit somebody, you're a true freshman and you hit somebody and the entire stadium goes, ooh, that's pretty cool. Like, I understand that, I hope everybody's okay coming out of that. It's his first career sack, so that's great. But man, that kid smacked that quarterback, and it was it's good to see. And at a position like defensive end where he's not necessarily going to work into the regular rotation, when he gets out there and is able to shine in limited spells, I mean, that's a good sign. This is a guy that they were extremely high on in camp, and this is it's cool to see. The Tracy, Rojas, Lions, those were the three guys that we kind of leaned on with our reporting in August in terms of freshmen that can make an impact, and it's cool to see them sort of do what they are projected to do, again, with that perspective of what you can expect from a true freshman. Rojas, I think we're going to talk about him. Maybe I was just zoned out by then, but I didn't notice Rojas as much on first viewing as I did when I went back and looked. I think I missed how well he played. He looked more comfortable than he did in week one. I know it's a different atmosphere, different everything, but he looked more comfortable. He looked like he knew where he was going. And I think that was encouraging as you try to build that linebacker depth and try and figure out what's the next step for what you need to do to put your most effective guys out there. So week 1 to week 2, Rojas was one of those guys I think made one of those jumps.
He was really impressive watching him do some of those linebacker type things as a guy coming from defensive end. And, he's got that contact ability. And I love this from Penn State of recruiting really explosive defensive ends and moving them to the will linebacker position, because they're able to naturally, they have a feel for how to slip blocks and how to play through contact. And he did some really impressive things, as you mentioned, kind of playing that will linebacker position in between the tackles, as you mentioned, which you're maybe not going to notice them right away, but then when you go back and look at it, I'm like, this is a template of how Manny Diaz wants a linebacker to fill that gap, which is to be aggressive, to be confident, and to get downhill. And it's fascinating watching him fill that gap and be an effective linebacker. Were there any of the other guys? I know I'll just give you the list of the players, and you can anybody you want to point out here. We mentioned Zion Tracy just a little bit. Kavion Keys, Lamont Payne, Tyreek Blanding were the other guys that got in the game on the defensive side of the ball. That on that final drive, I think Blanding and Payne were the guys that got in there. Kavion Keys flashed a little bit. Any of those guys stood out to you?
Zion Tracy on kick coverage. He made that play where, for whatever reason, the Delaware receiver or returner wanted to bring it out from 6 or 7 yards deep. Tried to get the corner. Zion Tracy did not let him get the corner. Now, was Zion Tracy maybe a little bit out of position in the first place? Maybe a little bit, but he had the speed to close. He closed, and I think they tackled him, on 9 or something like that. It was really good closure there for Zion Tracy. still see some more on. I would like to still see some more on corner. I don't think there's just enough there to evaluate that. Kevion Keys played one drive. I think had one tackle. He was active. Like he was, a guy that's been on the scout team, a guy that we don't really expect to factor in this year, but he was active there. So I think that was good. No real notes on Tamir Robinson, Ty Blanding, those guys. Jackson Smolik had a really, really nice handoff. I don't know if you guys got that or not, but other than that, that's about it. I was a little bit surprised that maybe Cam Wallace didn't get some run. I think it's really cool that Tank Smith, Tyler Holsworth, those program guys, guys that have been around a long time, guys that you want to reward in that situation, get those carries. That's great. I was just a little bit surprised we didn't see maybe Cam Wallace, London Montgomery, one of those freshman running backs get in there. And then, you get to the red shirts. I thought Christian Driver did some nice things. I thought he was, it's going to come up as the son of an NFL player, but he looks like a pretty natural football player who's thrown himself about, blocking, doing some good things. So I thought that was cool. But yeah, it's great to see these young guys get in. It's great to see these old guys, take a seat. We didn't see Olu after midway through the second quarter. Same for Hunter Norzad. Get some of those younger guys in there. Get Nick Dawkins in there to get him some snapping work and things like that. So, it's just one of those times when you can only evaluate what's in front of you, and that's kind of how we have gone about with this Delaware game.
Today's show brought to you by Bird Dogs, and I know that this is one of our favorite sponsors here on the show. Fitz, how have you been enjoying your Bird Dogs over the last month or so? We haven't really had a conversation about this in a little bit, so what has your journey been lately? Because mine has been sitting right here doing what we're doing right now.
Yeah, I'm still enjoying them. Still enjoying the every aspect of them, including the tumbler that I've got here. I think I missed the logo on that one. But no, still wearing them. Wore them to the West Virginia game, actually, because I could get away with that. That was pretty fantastic. Pretty comfortable night in Happy Valley. I know it was hot tailgating all day, but the Bird Dogs kept you cool. So that's I'm a big fan of them. Big fan of their product. Big fan of them supporting us here on the show.
Yeah, and if you want to, by the way, the promo code is BWI, birddogs.com/BWI, and the new deal is the tumbler. You missed the tumbler, but there is the Hydro Flask style water bottle that they can get you with your free with your first order from birddogs.com. We got a second hat. I mentioned to you the last time we were talking about this that I didn't have the hat to show you because my wife took it because she liked it so much. She has taken that hat as her own, but for my birthday, because she listens to the show, and I literally walk around being like, man, I love these shorts. She got me an extra pair for my birthday. So we have enough hats to go around. We have extra shorts. So birddogs.com, not literally putting my money where my mouth is as well, that we bought some of these shorts because I like them so much. Getting into the chat here, we got some things we got to clean up before we get into the next segment. Justin Warner says, first time being able to watch live. Thanks for all the hard work you guys put in. Much appreciated. Justin, thank you so much for that. Thank you for the donation to the channel. Everyone's in a good mood on Monday morning with the Penn State football win. I want to say thank you to everyone here. And if you're enjoying the show, we got a good crowd, more than we do normally on a Monday morning after a sleepy sort of Sunday. Please like the video, share with your friends so that we can make sure we have a great crowd every single day. It doesn't matter if it's post-Delaware or post-Whiteout. We're giving you the same effort, giving you the same intensity. We hope that we have the same crowd each week, and we want to grow it each week as well. So sharing and subscribing is the way you do that. Matthew Andrews back, Liam Andrews' father. Hey, guys, long time no talk. West Virginia game was amazing. Wife and I went with Liam, 110,000. Miami versus Texas A&M, NC State, and Notre Dame games were big games in smaller stadiums and not sold out. So Penn State fans, you've been putting up a good showing for your team throughout the first 2 weeks of the season.
The crowd on Saturday was fantastic. I thought, for Delaware, you're expecting half the student section or whatever. I thought the crowd was great. 108,000. Yeah. Okay. But that was a really good showing by Penn State fans for a noon kick in September, with traffic that's obviously going to be an issue anytime you're trying to squeeze that many people on that few roads. I think it was a good showing for Penn State fans, a good showing for Delaware fans too. Everywhere you look, there was Delaware fans. I think they enjoy the atmosphere as much as anybody, even though the game didn't turn out on their end. But I think they had an inkling of that going into it.
Yeah, there was a good number of Delaware fans, and they blended in pretty well because Delaware is blue and yellowish gold. So you had to look, and then you're like, oh, that's a Delaware shirt. Huh. Wow. cool that they're here.
They're proud of their hens, man. I
Yeah.
go down on vacation in Delaware. There's Delaware stuff everywhere. They're proud of that program, as they should be. It's one of the really good programs on the East Coast.
So great game, great crowd here on the live show. Again, just one last time, if you wouldn't mind liking and subscribing so that we can get you all of the great stuff here on the BWI Live show. Coming up in just a little bit, we are going to get to the BWI Mailbag, but we do have to talk about some recruiting on the recruiting show, and it was a shorter list. But Fitz, are there some interesting names that you want to pull out to talk about? Even if they're not like high-profile players, but players that are just interesting to you of who made the trip to Happy Valley for the Delaware game.
Unfortunately, this is probably I don't want to say the worst because it kind of degrades the guys that were there, but this was the least interesting visitor list I think I've covered. 35, 36 guys there. Lancaster Catholic brought a group that was a dozen deep, so like 24 recruits that were not from that group. So not much floating around. A bunch of 2024 walk-on type for the most part, but yeah, I mean it's we expected Elias Koch from Harrisburg to be there. He was the headliner coming into it. And their game got bumped with weather, all around on Friday night. Their game got bumped to Saturday morning against Manheim Township. So the lone guy that we had marked as an offer guy, he wasn't able to come. And that's completely expected when you move your game. Quentin Martin was back, so that's cool. He's 2 for 2 this year in trying to figure out who's going to win the crown among the 2024 commits in terms of most games. That's a good start for Quentin Martin. But I don't think we're going to spend too much time on this visitor list. Unfortunately, you said who. We have our rundown here. Fitz discusses the interesting name, and I just responded who is the interesting name, and that's not a slight on anybody that showed up, but it was a different type of visitor list, especially coming a week after West Virginia.
I kind of figured that when I looked through the list and none of the names looked familiar. So I was like, well, hopefully there's one guy that I just don't know about. And the recruiting experts are going to have T. Frank, this is what you should know. But that's
a couple. Charlie Lamort's a quarterback from a 2025 quarterback from New Jersey. He's got an Akron offer. So Joe Moorhead looked at him and offered him. Gavin Marshallak from Mount Carmel, the 2026 quarterback. He feels like he's been on the radar. Things like that. Patrick Smith from Mount Lebanon, 2026 quarterback. So, I mean, there's talent there, and like I said, it's not me trying to talk down. It's just very different than what we're used to on a week-to-week basis, especially when you've got West Virginia helmet stripe 1 week, you got Delaware, and then in 2 weeks you've got a whiteout, which is going to be a bit different, I guess I would say.
Will be. I don't want to be predicting your schedule, but I imagine that the whiteout list is going to be something we talk about quite a bit, even during the Illinois week, because the ramp up to that and just how much people love that particular game. It's obviously something that everyone knows about. So quick rundown.
It's the whiteout, and it's going to be warm out, I think. So like those two things go really well for Penn State when you're talking about hosting potential official visitors, but mostly unofficial visitors.
Quickly, just run down a couple of things I whipped up from the Friday scoreboard. Just give you a rundown of how Penn State players fared this past weekend in the class of 2024. Ethan Birchmeyer got a narrow win over the Olentangy Orange, 17-10. Good game because that particular team that they played last year, I think that was a blowout in terms of like. Last year, Birchmeyer's team lost to that team big, and this time they were able to come back and get a great win. Anthony Specca and the Central Catholic beat Bethel Park 63-46. I was watching a little bit of that with Peter Gonzalez and Anthony Specca out in that game. It was 22-3, I want to say, before they got out of the first quarter. So going through that a little bit today. Quentin Martin, Bell Vernon defeated McKeesport 21-14. Cooper Cousins and McDowell lost to North Allegheny 43-24. John Mitchell and Antoine Belgrave shorter. Mandarin beats Riverside 50-24. And then I was trying to find like the team players, so we get as many of the players in a short order. Donnie Harbor, Corey Smith, Catholic Memorial beats Milwaukee Lutheran 47-0. So those are your Friday scoreboards. We'll obviously have more about that throughout the season, talking about the Penn State football players that are committed to the class and how their senior seasons are going. Last thing we get to here on the show is your segment. Coming up right now, it's the BWI Mailbag. We have some great questions in the chat. And of course, throw those in right now and give us your most thought-provoking, interesting question for the mailbag. We got a couple to start us off with on the Lions Den message forum, which is a great time to remind you. Been talking about subscribing to the show and the channel. We do great work here, but all of the stuff, everything you want to know, bluewhiteillustrated.com. You can sign up right now and get access for a year, or you can get the monthly subscription. The year, by the way, is the deal you want to get to. Alex Birchmeyer. This is a question from HOHMADW 1978. Bit surprised that Alex Birchmeyer did not get a few reps on Saturday. Lots of good reports coming through about the freshman lineman. What were your view on what's holding Alex back from playing a few snaps when available at this point? I think that's a really great question. What have you seen the development from what we thought about him coming in to what's kind of resulted over the last couple of months?
Yeah, I mean, you can never fully predict a talented offensive lineman like Alex is, a very talented offensive lineman, great high school offensive lineman, great high school wrestler. So a lot of those things would translate. When he got here in January, it looked like he was going to play right away based on his athletic numbers, based on his size numbers, strength numbers, things like that. Just hasn't come to fruition. They played him out at tackle in the spring. It did not take. So I think that's probably something puts him a little bit behind in terms of developing as a guard, potentially as a center. I think lower body, like if you look at the other guys in this class and you look at Birchmeyer, I think lower body sticks out for Birchmeyer. So a year in the system, I think he'll have an opportunity to compete as a redshirt freshman.
Beach Wine Guy asks kind of a general question about what we saw on Saturday. Any concerns with the depth once they got on the field? Where were the biggest drop-offs from the ones to the twos? And this is something Nate said post-game, and I don't know if this kind of if this was reinforced in your second watch. Were there any drop-offs in terms of what you saw from the ones to the twos?
Yeah, I mean, I think at linebacker, it was one of those things where you looked at that and said that that's very different from your ones to your twos. Now, your ones are setting the bar pretty high there. Let's be honest, especially with Curtis Jacobs. I think Curtis Jacobs playing really well coming out of the season, coming out of the gates this season. So that's one that you look at. You wanted to see more in terms of receivers, but when Bo Pabula was in the game, they really didn't throw much. So it's so tough to sort of make that decision as to how far that drop is from those first, I would say, 5 guys. I mean, Amari Evans got in there. I mentioned Christian Driver got in there, did some nice things as well. But like that was as a blocker. Like I think Bo threw 5 passes. So I saw it in the comments a little bit earlier. I would have liked to see that a little bit too. Like maybe a little bit more traditional running of the offense. But as we've said, I think Penn State understands the situation going against Delaware, what's offered to them. Anyway, so those were the 2 that I was looking going into. Other than that, with depth, I think corner is a spot where maybe you look at and you say, not as great as you once expected, but they're going to get Daquan Hardy back at some point. And that's certainly going to boost that group as a whole. But yeah, I mean, it's so hard to judge because of what was in front of you. Penn State did what they needed to do for the most part. First team, second team, even third team was in there. Guys that were, guys that got a chance to play, like those running backs, Tank Smith and Tyler Holsworth. Jason Estrella was in there, walk-on wide receiver. So I think it's really cool. Jake Wilson, defensive end, when those program guys can get in there and do that, I think that's good. Obviously, there's going to be a drop-off there. But I will say one thing, like there was a lot of Trey Potts love after the game on Saturday, and I thought he did a nice job. But I think there's a pretty obvious gap there, right? Between the first 2 and Trey Potts. Potts, serviceable as a third guy. Absolutely what you would love to see out of him. But, if one of those first 2 running backs goes down for whatever reason, I think you've got not issues, but it's going to be very different than if Nick Singleton and Katron Allen were in there. And that's a pretty obvious observation on my part, I think.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, kind of following up on something we talked about earlier. Cam Wallace not playing in this game, I thought we both kind of noticed that of those program guys got in at the end of the game. Is there a special teams and or injury idea here of we want to hold those 4 games because we think he's good enough late in the season we might have to use him, and we still want to have the option of having that red shirt, and you don't want to burn one of his games early in the year even if it is a Delaware game where he could get some good reps?
That's my read on it. I mean, I think it's different when you're talking about a guy at a position like that, where all of a sudden one guy goes down, and that's a big step up. Like so
Yeah.
another offensive lineman goes down, and Anthony Dunca has to take a step up that ladder, but it's not the big step up the ladder where he's going to, end up filling in and getting, regular reps and things like
Yeah.
that. I think with the running backs, that would be the way that I would see it. Wallace got reps with the third team in warmups, and in a sense that I thought he was going to play. So that's kind of where I'm at. So, like I said, in the grand scheme of things, is it a huge surprise? Not necessarily when you get those carries to the older guys, the walk-ons that have certainly earned them. But at the same time, you were like, okay, maybe we wanted to see a little bit of sneak peek of those running backs, and we didn't
Yeah.
get Saturday.
Yeah, and I guess the framing is didn't get to play because it wasn't ready, or didn't get to play because he's too valuable, and there's maybe a future for him. And I think that's maybe the I'm glad we had that conversation here on the show, because it's something I was thinking about this weekend. Tyler, Elsdon is going to come up again. Are there reasons, and this is from WT Nuke on the message board, are there reasons I should be hopeful that Tyler Elsdon can improve in a meaningful way, or should I hope somebody in particular should emerge as a co-starter? Kobe King is the starting linebacker at this point, but another guy to take quality reps at that position. Is there somebody else, maybe wearing number 11, that everyone wants to play middle linebacker?
That's my curiosity right there. Is Abdul Carter the answer there? What do you do with Curtis Jacobs if that's the question? He has played some will. He played some will against West Virginia last weekend, so he has the ability to be versatile. Also interesting, just from talking to people in the program, like they think Curtis could play Mike if need be. I don't know that that's necessarily the best fit for Penn State's defense, but he can do it. So that's interesting to see there. But yeah, from the first question, I mean, Elsdon has put a lot on tape that makes you very apprehensive about throwing him out there. And we thought that maybe with getting taken care of the injury in the offseason, whatever he had to do, that may help things. But to be honest with you, it really hasn't. So that's been tough to watch over the first couple of weeks. But yeah, you're gonna have to figure out something. Mike Keon Wiley was in there for a bunch on Saturday, so I think he's a guy that still continues to need to get bigger to take the pounding that he's going to take in the middle of that defense. So that's kind of where I stand with that. Okay, you're back. I saw you disappear there for a second. I'm like, I'm on my own now, and this is going to go terribly. So thank you for coming back.
I have 3 camera batteries, and I charged all of them, and suddenly one of them died in the middle. I don't know. Maybe it was from my film study earlier today, which you can check out, bluewhiteillustrated.com. Recorded one of those. Lee W. asks, curious what our best passing percentage over the course of a season in modern history of Penn State is. That's a great question. I don't know, but I can tell you, I went and I looked at the adjusted completion percentage according to PFF, which is it takes away any throwaways or drops from the stat line. Right now, Drew Aller has completed 90% of his passes so far this season. That's impressive. And he's, hasn't been super conservative. He was on Saturday, but overall, I think he's been perfectly aggressive and has a completion percentage of 90%. That is really good.
Seems okay. Yeah, that's a pretty good start for him. And I like that they haven't thrown a ton at him. He's done some nice things with what he's been asked to do. Again, like I think one of his best plays last week was on the first drive when he went to throw the screen to Tyler Warren, the nickel or the outside linebacker, whoever it was, came up and was going to pick that ball off and run for 6. Like that, there was no in between. The only thing that happens is if he drops it. Like that's the best case scenario for Penn State. Drew eats it, gets a 4-yard gain as a run. I know there's some comments in here about him taking some shots, but like I said, he's a big boy. He's going to be able to take some shots, and you want him to take them now so he's not shell-shocked by it when a dude from Iowa comes up and hits him in the first drive of the game in the whiteout in a couple of weeks. So I think that those are the little things that you see from Drew Aller that you're encouraged by. And he can make the throw. The slant to Keandre after the touchdown was called back early in the game, the slant-ish post, somewhere in between there, drops it over a linebacker, drops it in front of the defender, a ridiculous throw that looks very common coming from Drew Aller. It looks like he's used to doing those things. So I think that's been the cool thing to watch, is his progression and his settling in to the offense over the first 2 weeks. I don't think you could really ask for much more.
Yeah, it's
you will,
been...
but yeah, you could.
You will, but yeah. Do you want to talk about Michigan State? I wanted to ask you this before the show. We didn't get a chance to. Do you want to cover that conversation of the situation with Mel Tucker being fired by the program and just the various aspects of how it could relate to the Big Ten? Do you want to cover that?
Sure. I mean, we can talk about. I'm not going to get into the specifics of his job. I think he's technically suspended, but I think he's done there. I think that's pretty. The reporting has been pretty obvious that he's not going to be back. So that'll be interesting. Bringing Dantonio back into the fold is interesting to me because that's a guy that's been floating around the program for a while there. But it's kind of the same situation, not same situation, but kind of the same conversation that we had with Northwestern a couple of months ago. Like, how does this happen? Actually, that's only been a month. My God, that's
wow.
Yeah, how about that? So anyway, but it's going to be a situation, I think, where they have the opportunity, those players, to look around. I don't know that it's going to be a scenario where we see a mass exodus from Michigan State. I don't think there's a gentleman's agreement. You see the question on the screen from PSU Ram. Do you make a push for any current Michigan State players? There's a Big Ten gentleman's agreement not to do so. No, I think that went out the door roughly to a few years ago. So I think that that's something that Penn State will be open to. Penn State spends time scouting other teams' rosters because we're in the transfer portal era. Now, they probably have a better idea of what Michigan State has. They recruit against Michigan State. They do some they do go head to head for some transfers sometimes, but I think that's something that Penn State will explore. I think something everybody will explore. It's just part of the reality now in college football. If that opportunity is going to be there for you, you kind of owe it to yourself to take them up on that. There are some names that have been familiar, or that Penn State's been familiar with from the recruiting process. So that's interesting. I think you look at this Michigan State class, and there are some guys there. Like, there are some guys that are worth looking for. So I wouldn't be shocked to see Penn State, pop up on their follows and do all the sort of due diligence that we're used to. But it's going to come back to Nick Marsh. Like, that's the guy that you're going to look at. Penn State felt extremely good about Nick Marsh coming out of his official visit for good reason. And all of a sudden he pops back up at Michigan State. Now, the reasons that he picked Michigan State, I know location is big. I know NIL was prevalent in that recruiting as well. So does that change much with Michigan State? Do you see a situation where Michigan State sort of, I don't want to say backs away from their commitment to football, but they're one of those schools that was very aggressive in terms of NIL, very aggressive in terms of the transfer portal. So do you, from a PR standpoint, take a step back from football and maybe, not go as hard not lean as hard in the NIL? And it's going to depend on the guy that they hire. Let's be honest here. Is it going to be a Michigan State guy? Is it going to be a guy that comes in and says, hey, I need to lock down this state, so Nick Marsh, you are my top priority. You have to do this. Just depends how big that window is, because they're going to make an emphasis to keep those guys home. They're going to make an emphasis we're basically only talking about Marsh right now, but make an emphasis to keep him home, make an emphasis to say he's the most important part of this whole piece in 2024. So that's going to be a tough sell, but I think there's going to be a window in there where it's going to be open. It's going to be open for Penn State to continue that line of conversation. And I even said this a couple of weeks ago in our S Zone. Those lines of communication have remained open. I mean, I don't think it's a situation where they're, talking to each other every day, but those lines of communications have remained open enough where you think that Penn State, if they wanted to get their foot in the door, and I think they do want to get their foot in the door, would be able to do so.
Yeah. And going all the way back to the summer where you and Ryan were talking about this class and what's going to happen and the receiver position specifically of where they're going to find dudes. Ryan especially always said, don't forget, things happen in college football. You'll have coaches get fired and you'll have guys crop back up late in the season. So this is a part of the story of the class of 2023. So if they don't sew up every single player immediately, there are opportunities down the road because they do exactly what you just said. And I just want to put a fine point on this because this is from a Michigan State perspective and an NIL money perspective. They're going to be fighting very hard to get out of that Mel Tucker contract, which, if you remember, 10 years, $95 million guaranteed. Fully guaranteed.
How about that?
So,
yeah. I mean, you're not wrong.
They're going to be working very hard to find cause in his contract to avoid that, so it's not fully guaranteed, because that's a massive investment in the program. And not that I I don't want to get into the value of doing that or not doing that in terms of like, should you spend that much money on a head coach, especially one who had not proven as much as some other guys. But at the same time, like your Michigan State, as you mentioned, going all in on football. And like that was part of the conversation of going all in on football. So landing on a Michigan State topic here to end the show, is there anything else you wanted to cover before we get out of here, Fitz? Any last thoughts on the show?
We got some things in the chat just to run through here. Do you buy the Franklin bit about how teams are going to have to prepare for Prabula as a backup quarterback? Yes, I do. Like, because he's so different than Drew, because he gives you something different that you have to prepare for, which is the quarterback run, and a little bit more discipline is in order for your defense to be ready for that. And you don't prepare to knock out a quarterback, but you have to prepare for what's out there. And I think that because they are so different, I think that you do have to spend some time in the week being prepared if number 9 comes in there. So I don't necessarily think it's something where Penn State's going to take Drew off the field, because I don't know that makes them any better or more of a threat to score. But you're going to have to prepare for it, and that's what these teams of analysts and these teams of assistant coaches will be focused on at other programs, just in the coming weeks.
The thing that I keep thinking about, and something somebody brought up over the weekend, was, I think it was on the postgame show, were you concerned, or do you think that Beau Pribula runs the ball too much, or why do they call so many runs for Beau Pribula? And I'm like, well, that's not how the play works. A read option play, there's an option to give the ball or to keep it. And if you're Delaware and the run game has been crushing you all day, and suddenly, and by the way, you prepared all week for Drew Aller, suddenly there's a running quarterback in there who will pull the ball and run. So if they'd called straight runs, you would have seen a lot more Tank Smith. You would have seen a lot more Trey Potts. But it is in his nature to run the ball more and to see it a little. I think James Franklin talked about it either post-game or at some point this week, of your running quarterback sees the field differently and can provide those options, and has there is a value in showing that and having that on your roster. I still think seeing Beau Pribula in the T formation would bring everything to a new level. But of course, you obviously want to have Drew Aller out there on critical third downs and fourth downs. But interesting thoughts. Fitz, as always,
speaking into existence there. Put him in the T formation. We'll see that. I saw the Giants used it last night.
Yep.
Yeah, the Giants did not do many things well last night, but I think they got a first down when they used the T, so that's nice.
Yeah, they've been watching a lot of Penn State football. Apparently, that not the first time. By the way, Mike Yurcich drawing up some stuff that people really like. I'm always impressed by the way he can evolve those things. And just one last little nugget of, you've got a 6'5" quarterback at the goal line, so maybe you don't want to put Beau Pribula in there, because he can get some push at the goal line and get a touchdown as well.
Well, on that, the design quarterback run is not gone from the playbook. Like, Drew can do it. Like, I think he run 4 times on Saturday. I think 2 of them, or 5 times, 2 of them were design runs. I mean, they'll do it. Like, they did it against West Virginia, ran a QB power down near the goal line. Like, that's he's a big dude, and he's hard to bring down. He's not the fastest guy out there, but like, he's fast enough. And if he gets ahead of steam, I know you, as a Bills fan who has a big night tonight, knows that when he's 6'5", 245-pound quarterback gets moving forward, that he brings something there. So no, I disagree with the comments that you shouldn't run him. I disagree with the whole don't lay him out there for big hits. He's going to have to take a hit at some point, and it's you saw on Saturday, that's probably where you want him taking it, as opposed to in a couple of weeks when Iowa's defense is trying to swarm.
Yeah, and I'll agree that having watched Josh Allen run at the goal line for 3 years, I do like the fact that Penn State has power backs and guys that have strength, that you don't have to rely on your quarterback being your goal line back like you did with Sean Clifford a couple years ago. Right. So it's always a balancing act, right?
You just want to have as many options as possible. When that option happens to be 6'5", 240, that helps as well.
That'll do it today for the BWI Live Show. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. That is Sean Fitz, doing an excellent job providing you insight. If you want more of that insight, you want more of that analysis, go to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Should say this more on the show because it is true. The best coverage you're going to get of Penn State football, basketball, wrestling is at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. We give you the good stuff there, from our premium content to our message board content. It is well worth your time and money. And by the way, I think it's $109 right now. That's not even $10 a month. So it's a super duper investment in your favorite hobby of Penn State sports. I'm Thomas Frank Carr once again for Sean Fitz. We will talk to you on Wednesday.